non-defaulters or distressed defaulters. The use of loans to related parties, what are called intercorporate loans. Intercorporate loans, positive for the willful defaulters. They employ this, significantly, while it's negative for non-defaulters and for the distressed defaulters. So, and this is something which I, often talk about. Related party transactions are really critical for us to be able to really track down some of these kind of phenomena and thereby enhance trust in. Now remember, this is just univariate statistics. I'm just showing a bar chart. A bar chart which anybody who's actually learned a little bit of statistics should be able to distinguish. But there are much more sophisticated methods with now artificial intelligence and machine learning, which can be used to. My apologies. Which can be used to detect phenomena like these. In fact, my BTech thesis at IIT Kanpur was on, what was a precursor to some of the AI and ML. So I worked on using neural networks to electrical engineering problems. And at that time itself, actually, neural networks could do a fairly good job of trying to provide early warning signals to some of the electrical engineering phenomena. Now, with the advances that have happened, artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc., it's kids' play to be able to identify patterns like these to stop, willful defaults, and that's one of the key policy suggestions that actually has been provided in the survey on the banking sector. This is another, I think, which is quite telling. What this shows is the one bank. If one bank has declared a borrower as a defaulter, do other banks pick up that information and thereby declare that borrower to be a defaulter? Notice that phenomenon was almost non-existent as of 2014, which means there was, as economists like to say, classic asymmetric information, where a borrower was, able to get away from, other banks, even though one bank had already labeled him or, her a defaulter. That has increased significantly over the last 5 years. But this is something that should have happened, much before. For instance, the credit databases that RBI has deployed, which provides information on the, on loans taken by large borrowers across all banks. Something as simple as that could have actually kept the sharing of this at 95% as in 2014 itself. So data, technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all these analytics can be a big tool in enabling trust in the society and in especially avoiding phenomena like these, and thereby strengthen the role of trust in the system. So this is just a couple of more wealth creation at the grassroots level. What is being shown here is the new firms created using the Ministry of Corporate Affairs database across India from 2006 to 2019. Notice that new firm creation is actually quite widespread all over India. The example that I use, many of you would have, I don't know whether you've watched this movie called Bang Baja Barat. How many of you have seen this movie? So there is this protagonist in this movie called Shruti Kakkad. In fact, in the south also, and a movie, a dubbing of this was done, which was called Aha Kalyanam. There also the protagonist is Shruti. So Shruti in this movie basically says that she wants to be the best wedding planner in the whole country. What this map clearly suggests is that Shrutis are mushrooming all over India at the district level. And not only are they mushrooming all over India, they're contributing to prosperity at the district level, because what is being shown on the right hand side is the causal impact. Now this is not a correlation. This is the impact, causal impact of firms created in a district 3 years back on district GDP 3 years later. And it controls for all other what are called confounding factors, and therefore this is indeed a causal estimate. An increase of 10% in new firm creation in a district translates into 1.8% increase in the GDP in the district, which actually has important implications because, if suppose these new firms were being created by people like you versus, let's say, the new firm was being created because of necessity, which is the person is becoming an entrepreneur because he or she does not get a good job. There would be a big difference in the kind of firms that you folks create versus firms that are created out of necessity. If they were created out of necessity, it's less likely that the impact of such firms created out of necessity would be impacting economic growth. But it clearly seems like firms are being created, many of them by people like you, and that's why the clear positive impact on economic growth at the district level. This is quite important and interesting. So if you take the World Bank data, World Bank's ease of doing business and the new firm creation data, till about if you look at the CAGR, the cumulative annual growth rate, from 2006 to 2014, is 3.8%. So new firms the creation of new firms was growing at about 4% up until 2014 and has been growing at about 12% since then, from 2014 to 2019. This is important for actually a later chapter that I've written, which is very important, about our GDP growth not being overestimated. There has been a debate about whether GDP growth has been overestimated or underestimated. Chapter 10 in the economic survey goes into great detail. I think many of our professors of statistics, Professor Chattopadhyay, would actually enjoy reading that chapter a lot. We've basically thrown the kitchen sink in terms of the various statistical tests to examine whether there is indeed any over or underestimation, and we come to the very robust conclusion that there is absolutely no over or underestimation of GDP growth. And I'll just give you one tidbit here. If you basically use the econometric model that basically shows that India's GDP growth rate is overestimated by 2.7%, then that same econometric model also shows that out of 95 countries, 51 other countries, their GDP growth rates are also over or underestimated. Now you can't have 51 countries actually out of 95, over or underestimating their growth rates. And in particular countries like UK, Germany, for UK the overestimation is about 1%, for Germany by 1.6%. Given their base growth rates itself, these are actually far higher. So now part of the reason why the incorrect model does not pick up the increase in the growth rate or the change in the growth rate is because of phenomena like these. As I already showed you, that new firm creation translates into GDP growth, and that new firm creation, the rate of that has been much higher. So this is basically the kind of, now this is an important dimension, which is about, what is the impact of market reforms on the economy. Take a look at the BSE Sensex of 1986 and the Sensex of 1997. If a firm was part of the Sensex in 1986, the likelihood that that firm continued to be part of the Sensex even 9 years later was almost 100%. In other words, if you became part of the Sensex in 1986, 9 years later, closely you would be sitting there in the Sensex, and there is no likelihood of you basically being bumped out by another firm. But look at the 1997 Sensex. Of the firms that started out being in the Sensex in 1997 or any year after that, only 25% of the firms are left after 9 years. This is the churn that happens when the economy is opened up. That you get new firms, you get new, as a result they bring in new products, you have new sectors coming up. This shows the kind of churn that has happened through enabling of the invisible hand of the market. One more way I'll show this, which is, that's the proportion of the different sectors, their contribution to the Sensex as of 1985. when the Sensex started, and 2019. Notice that in 1985, sectors like consumer discretionary materials were the firms that basically occupied the most. So in 1985, day zero at IIM Calcutta would have actually had firms like these being the most aspirational, because they were the ones that were contributing the most. But notice their contribution today has shrunk a lot, and importantly, you see sectors like information technology, financial sector, which did not even exist in 1985, now have a significant chunk. Look, financials, similarly look at information technology, which is basically this. They did not even exist as of 1985, now are playing a critical role. And again, that reflects actually, count the number of firms that would be the most attractive on day zero here in campus. Those certainly will be some of the big contributors to the Sensex. That shows the churn that gets enabled through an open market economy, not a closed one, which is basically what we followed till 1991. Now, this is the last bit, which actually, and I'll end with this, which is, apart from enabling, markets, what the government also needs to do is to step out from intervening when there is no necessity. And one crucial example of that is the Essential Commodities Act. The Essential Commodities Act was created, was enacted much before many of us were born. 1955. The Indian economy of 1955 was a very, very different one. Had emerged from ravages of famine. Food shortages were endemic. Food production was not that high. And so at that time, the Essential Commodities Act, which is basically saying that there are some essential commodities, and if prices of those rise, the government will intervene to ensure that the prices, those commodities are affordable. That's what the act really was about. In 1955, that possibly had a good justification. But the Indian economy of today, it's the 5th largest economy in the world. Instead of food shortages, we actually have our FCI go down, being bursting at the seams with food. Famines are something that we only hear stories about. So the Indian economy is very different, and yet this anachronistic piece of legislation continues to exist. This is just one example of how unnecessary intervention by the government really reduces welfare of society. What is being shown here is the standard deviation of prices. And again, you guys would understand standard deviation captures the variability of prices. So standard deviation for potatoes and onions, both in the wholesale market and the retail market. This is a recent phenomenon. All of you would have actually, read about it in the newspapers. Notice that after the production shock, clearly the standard deviation increased. But what is crucial is, even after stock limits were imposed under the Essential Commodities Act, there is no impact. If the Essential Commodities Act was effective in bringing down the volatility in prices, what we should have seen is the production shock increases the standard deviation, and then once stock limits are imposed, it should come down. That's what we should have observed. Instead, what you see is it continues going up. Now, this is not restricted just to onions. In the recent episode, if you take a look at gram, this is dal, pulses versus rice, and the stock limits here were imposed in 2007. You see the same pattern here as well. Rice versus dal. Production shock comes for dal. The standard deviation goes up, but the imposition of stock limits does nothing. Similarly, if you were to look at that's for salt versus sugar. And this is when the production shock came around in 2008. Again, you see salt versus sugar. Stock limits are imposed on sugar. Nothing happens. Which basically shows how the impact of these acts are actually, non-existent. In fact, I'll end with this. In order to enforce the Essential Commodities Act, there are a ton of raids that are carried out all over the country. About 80,000 raids were carried out, last year. That's the data from that we quoted the survey. Can you guess what is the success rate of these raids? Single digits, 2%, 3%. So there's a huge administrative infrastructure that tries to basically go and enforce this act. Doesn't result in any success, and we in fact show that the correlation of the raids that are conducted with the with change in volatility of prices, the correlation is zero. There is no correlation. So acts like these have basically become opportunities for rent seeking and really don't serve much purpose at all and are anachronistic. So in order for wealth creation to happen, what we recommend is actually a set of laws that need to be also looked at, because they've become anachronistic. So let me summarize by this survey, at least from my perspective, is important because it's an unabashed case for respecting wealth creators. It's a case for basically understanding that welfare, which is basically wealth redistribution, cannot happen without wealth creation in the first place. It's like, and I'll leave you with this example. Suppose you actually, in your wing, you decide to order pizza tonight, and you all decide how many slices each one of you is going to take. If you think about basically the distribution among you, thinking about actually a large pizza, and yet you actually get only a small pizza, there is no way that all of you would be able to get the slices that you want. In other words, the size of the cake, the size of the pizza matters if you have to redistribute it. Without having a bigger pizza, there is no way you can actually share it with all your wingmates. And that is why wealth creation is important. Wealth creation is something that has been respected in the Indian context always. If you leave this ephemeral period, after all, as I said, few decades is ephemeral in the context of millennia. If you leave that out, wealth creation has always been respected, and ethical wealth creation has been respected, and that comes by enabling the hand of markets and supporting it with the hand of trust. Thanks a lot. I'll be happy to take questions.